Anyway, hi, I'm John, one of the pastors here at Grace. I'm delighted to be with you tonight, and I would like to read a passage for you that I'm going to be, the message is based on. And this is a passage that we actually read every year at Grace. It's a part of our normal lectionary cycle that we normally preach on, and so it comes up every year. And that does a couple of things. First of all, it's sometimes a difficult passage to preach on because you preach on it every year, and you're always trying to come up with something kind of new and different and exciting about the same passage. But it's also one that's very familiar. And so it's basically the story of the Transfiguration. And we are studying the book of Luke. And so for tonight, this is the passage that comes up for today in the passage of Luke. So it's Luke chapter 9, verses 28 to 36. And it goes like this. Now about 8 days after these sayings, Jesus took with him Peter, John, and James, and went up on the mountain to pray. And while he was praying, the appearance of his face changed, and his clothes became dazzling white. Suddenly they saw two men, Moses and Elijah, talking to him. They appeared in glory and were speaking of his departure, which he was about to accomplish at Jerusalem. Now Peter and his companions were weighed down with sleep, but since they had stayed awake, they saw his glory and the two men who stood with him. Just as they were leaving, Peter said to Jesus, "Master, it is good for us to be here. Let us make 3 dwellings, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah," not knowing what he said. While he was saying this, a cloud came and overshadowed them, and they were terrified as they entered the cloud. Then from the cloud came a voice that said, "This is my son, my chosen. Listen to him." When the voice had spoken, Jesus was found alone. And they kept silent in those days, told no one any of the things they had seen. So I want you to imagine with me for a moment that you are on a tour of the Vatican City. Okay? Now, if you're on a tour of Vatican City, one of the things that you want to do for sure is to go to the Sistine Chapel. And you want to go to the Sistine Chapel so you can see Michelangelo's work. Now, Michelangelo's work has just gone through a renovation a few years back, okay? And you've been waiting for hours in line to get a glimpse of this remarkable masterpiece. Now, at a distance, the paintings don't look all that impressive. They just don't. When you get closer, however, you just become overwhelmed at what you see. The paintings seem to just engulf you, and everybody now in line is totally silent. And necks are beginning to ache because people are trying to keep their heads up so they can look and see what's there on the ceiling. And now you're seeing the paintings as Michelangelo intended for them to be seen. And the experience is it's overwhelming and certainly unforgettable. And then you notice a fly. You notice a fly crawling across the paintings. What a shame, you think. That fly is right up there where you'd love to be. But it's just right on top of it all. But the problem is, you can't see it. Listen to the words of philosopher William Irwin Thompson. Here's what he writes. "We are like flies crawling across the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel. We cannot see what angels and gods lie underneath the threshold of our perceptions." Our lesson from Luke's Gospel tonight is like a series of magnificent paintings. Think of the Sistine Chapel, okay? Like a series of paintings. The setting for each of the paintings is a mountaintop. In the first painting, we see Jesus and his inner circle of disciples, Peter, James, and John. Jesus is praying. The disciples are sleeping. In the second painting, we see the results of Jesus' prayer. We see the results. The appearance of his face has changed, And his clothes are as bright as the flash of lightning. Two men, Moses and Elijah, appear with him. Peter and his companions, who were once asleep, now are fully awake. And Peter is saying to Jesus, Master, it is good that we are here. Let us make 3 dwellings, one for you and one for Moses and one for Elijah. And Luke tells us that poor Peter didn't know what he was saying. He didn't know what he was saying. In the third painting, a cloud has appeared and enveloped the men. The disciples are hidden by the cloud and they're afraid. And a voice is coming from the cloud saying, This is my son, my beloved. Listen to him. In the final painting, the fourth painting, the voice is now silent. The cloud is gone, and so are Moses and Elijah. And Jesus and his 3 disciples are alone once more. But there is a strange and mysterious look on the disciples' faces. Luke tells us that they kept silent, and in those days told no one any of the things they have seen. Now, how shall we deal with these 4 memorable paintings from the Mount of Transfiguration? Shall we pursue them briefly and marvel at the hand of the artist and then move on to other notable paintings with no thought of what the artist is trying to say? Worse, shall we be like flies on the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel who see these works of art as just momentary resting places that have no power to discern their ultimate worth or value? Or shall we look for some deeper meaning? Shall we look for some relevant truth about our lives and about our destinies? Well, I vote for the latter. And that's what we're going to do tonight. We're going to look for that deeper meaning in these 4 paintings from the Mount of Transfiguration. Actually, the entire essence of the Christian faith is wrapped up in these 4 paintings. They speak to the very heart of everything we believe about life, about God, and about our reason for being. So that's what I want to sum up, what these paintings say to us from the Mount of Transfiguration. First of all, they say that there's more to reality than what we can see, hear, touch, taste, or smell. There is more. This experience on the Mount of Transfiguration was no ordinary mountaintop experience. It was not simply a matter of Peter, James, and John being overwhelmed at the beauty of creation like we sometimes are on a church retreat or when we go for a hike in the Cascades or the Olympics. Oh, we cherish those experiences. We really enjoy those experiences. They're awesome for sure. But here, this is something way more. This is something way more than that. In the German classic Faust, the writer Goethe describes a pact that Dr. Faust makes with the devil. The pact allows Faust to satisfy every human desire and want except for one. Never under any circumstances is he ever to stop and say to the passing moment, "Wait, you are so beautiful." Our world is beautiful. It's magnificent. It's so intricate. It's so perfect in so many ways. You know, scientists tell us that the slant of the earth, for example, is tilted at 23 degrees, and it produces our seasons, right? If the earth had not been tilted exactly as it is, vapors from the oceans would move both north and south, piling up great continents of ice. If the moon were only 50,000 miles away from the earth instead of 200,000 miles, the tides would be so enormous that all of the continents would be totally submerged in water. If the surface of the earth had been only 10 feet thicker, there would be no oxygen. And without oxygen, there would be no life. And the story goes on and on about the way that our world is created. This world is mystical, it's magical, it's magnificent, and it overwhelms our senses to contemplate the glory of God's creation. However, the Mount of Transfiguration says to us that if we take the sum total of everything beautiful and wonderful that we have ever experienced through our five senses, through sight, hearing, touch, taste, and smell, when we add up every good feeling we have ever had about friends, family, health, and hope, when we include everything this world has to offer us for happiness, joy, and peace, there is still more. That's what this story tells us. There is a reality, you see, there is a reality that scientific instruments cannot measure, that our best philosophical minds cannot fathom, that our most sophisticated rockets cannot reach. It is the realm of the spiritual. It is the spiritual realm. It is the reality of a living God. These paintings tell us there's more to reality. There's more to reality than what our senses can detect. These paintings also tell us that there's more to living than dying. What sad, meaningless lives many people in our secular world live. And we can hear it in the rhetoric of debate that goes on about the great issues of our time. But never, almost never, is the question raised about ultimate values or the will of God or eternal consequences. And why is that? Well, it's because people really live with the expectation that life really does end at the grave. You know, our whole attitude toward death has undergone a radical change in this brave new world of ours. And people truly believe that life ends at the grave. There was an interesting story in the newspapers, it was several years ago now, but it was about the mail that comes into the White House in Washington, D.C. Workers and volunteers there handle between 50 and 60,000 pieces of mail every week. Even the first dog gets mail. One of the volunteers does nothing but answer the first dog's mail. And every reply is stamped with a paw print. Yeah. But perhaps the strangest piece of mail, however, that was one that former President Bush once received. It was a letter inviting him to a funeral. To the funeral of a man described as a hard-working, patriotic American. The man, however, wasn't dead. The family explained that he was hooked up to life support, and they could pull the plug at any time to suit the president's schedule. True story. Death on demand. Death with dignity. Right? Those are kind of code words of our time. For the Christian, however, there is a more pressing issue. And that more pressing issue is that death has been defeated. That's the pressing issue. There on the Mount of Transfiguration, the disciples are there. They see Jesus and Moses and Elijah. Well, how long have Moses and Elijah been dead? 500 years? 1,000 years? It doesn't matter. Why? Because there's no time in the spiritual realm. There's no measure of time. God is the God of the living, Jesus proclaimed. There is more to living than dying. In Focus on the Family magazine, there was one of these kind of warm and fuzzy stories. It was a good story, beautiful story. And it was titled A Letter for Luke. It was about an 11-year-old boy named Landon who stood in front of his mom one day and he said, "I wish I could write a letter to Luke." The mother could see the tears that her son was trying not to shed. You see, 9 months before, Landon's best friend Luke had died very suddenly of a brain hemorrhage. Landon's grief was very, very deep, unreachable, and his mother really wanted to ease his pain, but she didn't know what to do. All she could do was just hold on to him when he cried. Maybe, she thought, writing a letter was a good idea. So she handed Landon paper and colored pencils, and she suggested, she said, "Tell Luke how much you miss him and how much you love him, and tell him you haven't forgotten." So Landon sat down and he wrote the letter, and it was a long letter. The completed paper was a work of art. He wrote each line in a different color, and then he carefully drew an elaborate border around the edge. It was really a love letter. It was a love letter, a message sent from earth to heaven. Well, Landon folded the paper carefully, and together, he and his mom asked God to give Luke its message. But that wasn't quite enough. What I really want to do is to tie my letter to a balloon, said Landon. I know it can't really get to heaven, but, and he left the sentence unfinished. His mother drove him to the store, and there Landon chose a neon pink helium balloon to carry his letter. And then they drove up this steep butte at the edge of town. It was a peaceful place on top, offering an endless view of the high desert and the mountains. And there was a gentle breeze blowing. And when Landon released the balloon, it instantly danced away from his fingers. And they watched it silently, and up and up and up it went. And it climbed rather quickly, as if it knew the importance of its mission. I wish something could happen so I could know that God got this letter, Landon said. His mother, too, wished that something would happen, but her practical side spoke, assuring Landon that God would give Luke the message regardless of what happened to the balloon. I know, but I still wish something would happen, Landon said. Well, the sky was covered with thick, heavy clouds, and the balloon grew smaller and smaller as it went up into the sky. And then suddenly, just as the balloon was getting ready to leave their vision, an opening appeared in the clouds, and the balloon sailed right through the opening. And they stood there speechless. Did you see that, Mom? Landon whispered reverently. God got my balloon. And as they drove back down the butte, his mother knew the message indeed had been delivered. They felt what Peter, James, and John must have felt as that cloud enveloped them on the Mount of Transfiguration. You see, there is more to life than our senses can detect, and there is more to living than dying. There's one more thing to be learned from these paintings, and it's this. There is more to Christian commitment than going to the mountaintop. There should be a fifth painting of the Transfiguration experience. And this painting would show Jesus and his 3 disciples coming down from the mountaintop and ministering to the needs of the people down below. Peter suggests they build 3 booths, 3 dwellings, and stay on the mountain. But he doesn't know what he's saying. Because followers of Jesus who believe there is a spiritual realm and who believe that death has been defeated are not given the luxury of sitting around twiddling their thumbs and idly reveling in those great truths. That's not what the Christian faith is about. We are called to seek out the least and the lowest and to minister to them in Jesus' name. A man by the name of J. Adams tells about a friend who went on a missionary trip to New Guinea. After some years of service in what is called the Fly River region, he returned. He came to see Adams, and Adams said to him, "Tell me what you found at your station in New Guinea." "Found," said his friend. "I found something that looked more hopeless than if I had been sent to the jungle to a bunch of tigers." "Well, what do you mean?" asked Adams. "Why, those people were utterly devoid of moral sense," said his friend. "They were worse than beasts. If a mother were carrying her little baby and the baby began to cry, she would throw it in the ditch and leave it to die. If a man's father broke his leg, he would leave him along the roadside and just leave him there to die. They had no compassion whatsoever. They didn't know what it meant." "Well, what did you do for people like that? Did you preach to them?" Adams asked. "Preach? No, I lived." His friend replied. "Lived? Well, how did you live?" Adams asked. "When I saw a forsaken baby crying," his friend answered, "I comforted it. When I saw a man with a broken leg, I mended it. When I saw people in distress, I took them in and I took care of them. I lived that way. And those people began to come to me and say, what does this mean? What are you doing this for? Why are you doing this? And then I had my chance and I preached to them the good news of Jesus Christ. Were you successful? Did you succeed? Adams asked. When I left, said his friend, I left the church. You see, that's the test of every mountaintop experience. Does it motivate us to reach out to our neighbor? Does it motivate us to reach down to the least and the lowest and to minister to them? There is no staying on the mountaintop for those who love Jesus Christ. That's not what we're called to do. Jesus always calls us to come off the mountaintop and to go down into the valley, and yes, sometimes even to the valley of the shadow of death. Well, what about you and me? How do you feel about these portraits that Luke has given us of Christ's transfiguration? Are you like the art critic who views them with cool detachment and moves on? Or worse still, are you like a fly on the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel who see these paintings as just a simple place to rest and have no awareness that there's anything great going on here at all? Or are we ready to leave the mountaintop, to head down to the valley, to roll up our sleeves and get to work? Because that, you see, is the essence of the Christian faith. Would you pray with me?